Jerome Carter was 42 years old, and until that Tuesday night, he believed patience was its own kind of protection. He was a quiet man, steady hands, early mornings, a marriage he had invested in completely. His wife Trish saw a maintenance man who came home smelling like work, and she had made her decision about him a long time ago. So when she threw him out for being poor, standing in their doorway telling him he would never be enough, that she deserved more than a maintenance man could offer, she said it with the confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. What she did not know was that the man walking down that front path with a single bag had 4 companies, a private fleet, and a net worth she had never thought to investigate. Because she had never thought him capable of anything worth investigating, Jerome reached the bottom of that walkway, pulled out his phone, and made one call. 4 words. And within minutes, 15 black SUVs rolled silently down that residential street and stopped at her curb. What happened next would cost Trish everything she thought she had secured. But standing in that doorway, watching those vehicles arrive, she was only just beginning to understand how wrong she had been. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Jerome Carter woke before his alarm, the darkness still thick outside his bedroom window. He lay still for a moment, listening to Trish's steady breathing beside him, then eased out of bed without disturbing her. The hardwood floors, which he had installed himself 2 summers ago, were cool under his feet. In the kitchen, he moved with practiced quiet, measuring coffee grounds into the filter. Every surface in this room carried his fingerprints: the granite countertops he'd selected and installed, the backsplash tiles he'd laid one by one, the soft close cabinet hinges he'd retrofitted on a long weekend. The house was full of these invisible signatures, improvements Trish had wanted, but never asked how he managed to provide. While the coffee brewed, Jerome retrieved 3 phones from their charging station in his home office. The personal one showed a text from his mother. She was an early riser, too. The other 2, slim black devices in heavy-duty cases, displayed notifications that pulled his attention immediately. The first message was from Troy Banks, his head of security. Route 7 driver called in sick. Need confirmation on backup assignment. Jerome typed a quick response. Put Martinez on it. He's certified for that route. The second phone showed an alert about a mechanical issue with one of the armored vehicles. He forwarded it to his maintenance team with clear instructions, then checked the schedule to ensure the backup vehicle was ready. These morning problems were familiar, almost comforting. They were clean problems with clear solutions. Unlike the quiet tension that had been growing in his marriage, these issues could be fixed with decisions and action. Coffee in hand, Jerome walked out to his truck, parked in the driveway. The morning air was crisp, carrying the first hint of fall. He stored both business phones in the locked center console, a habit born from his decision 8 years ago to keep his work life separate. Not hidden, exactly, just contained. Back inside, he leaned against the counter and sipped his coffee, remembering the day he'd started Carter Consolidated Holdings. One used truck, one contract with a law firm that needed secure document transport. He'd driven that route himself for 6 months, sleeping 4 hours a night, reinvesting every dollar that didn't go to basic survival. Now he had a fleet of vehicles, 3 separate offices, and a team of loyal employees who called him Mr. Carter with genuine respect. The maintenance division had started as a way to diversify income, but it had grown into a solid operation of its own. When Trish told people her husband worked in maintenance, she wasn't lying. She just didn't know it was only one branch of a much larger tree. Jerome finished his coffee and rinsed the mug, placing it in the dishwasher, another upgrade he'd installed himself. Upstairs, he could hear Trish starting to stir. He climbed the stairs quietly, entered their bedroom, and bent to kiss her cheek. "Heading out," he said softly. She made a small sound of acknowledgement. already reaching for her phone on the nightstand. There was a time when she would have asked where he was going, what his day looked like. Now, she just nodded, thumb scrolling through messages. The drive to his main office gave him time to think. The building itself was impressive. Modern glass and steel, professional security at the entrance, a fleet of black SUVs parked in precise formation. Trish had never seen it. In 3 years of marriage, she had never once asked to visit his workplace, never questioned how a maintenance contractor afforded the suits he wore to client meetings, never wondered about the calls he took in his home office. 12 hours later, Jerome pulled back into his driveway. Trish's car was still there, but she was dressed in a black cocktail dress, putting on earrings in the hallway mirror. "Work function," she said before he could ask. "Don't wait up." He watched her gather her purse, check her lipstick one final time. She didn't ask about his day, didn't notice the faint smell of leather from the new fleet vehicle he'd inspected, didn't see him at all, really. As her car backed out of the driveway, Jerome sat at the kitchen island, running his hand along the smooth granite he'd selected with such care. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator, another upgrade he'd installed last spring. The silence felt different now, charged with something he'd been feeling for months, but hadn't named until this moment. Her absence had a shape to it, a deliberate quality. She wasn't just distant, she was orchestrated, like someone following a carefully drawn map to somewhere else. Jerome sat there for a long time, surrounded by all the improvements he'd made to a home that suddenly felt less like theirs and more like a stage set for whatever scene Trish was preparing to end. After Trish's car disappeared down the street, Jerome remembered the registration renewal notice sitting on his desk. He needed the insurance document, which Trish always kept filed away in her home office. The room was meticulously organized. One of Trish's proudest qualities was her attention to detail. Jerome flicked on the light, taking in the familiar space. Her desk was pristine, with color-coded folders arranged in neat stacks. The filing cabinet stood in the corner, its dark metal surface reflecting the overhead light. He'd helped her move it in when they first combined households, the weight of it leaving marks on the hardwood that he'd later refinished. Opening the top drawer, Jerome found it arranged alphabetically. Under I for insurance, he found nothing. Frowning, he remembered Trish mentioning she'd reorganized some files by category rather than letter. The car documents would probably be under house or vehicle. The house tab caught his eye. A thick manila folder stuffed fuller than the others. Jerome pulled it out, expecting to find mortgage papers, tax records, and somewhere in there, the insurance documents. What he found instead made his hands go still. Bank statements, dozens of them, carefully arranged by date, for an account he'd never seen before. The name at the top read, Patricia A. Carter, but their joint accounts weren't listed anywhere on the paper. This was something separate, something hidden. Jerome's fingers moved mechanically through the statements, each page revealing more of a pattern he wished he wasn't seeing. Small transfers, never more than a few $100s at a time, moved from their joint account through what looked like a deliberate series of steps. The amounts were structured carefully, spread out just enough to avoid obvious detection. The running balance at the bottom of the most recent statement, $47,000. The systematic nature of it hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't impulsive. This had been happening for 14 months. While he was installing new cabinets in their kitchen, while he was fixing the guest bathroom plumbing, while he was kissing her goodbye every morning, she had been executing this careful extraction of their shared money. But it was the email printout beneath the statements that turned his blood to ice. The sender's name jumped out immediately. David Osei. Jerome didn't know him, but the familiarity in the words that followed made it clear Trish did. Very well. Everything's proceeding according to the timeline we discussed, the email read. Once you've confirmed the date, I can start looking more seriously at those properties we viewed. Your exit needs to be clean and complete. No loose ends he can use to drag things out. Jerome's hands were steady as he continued reading, even as something inside him cracked open. The attorney I mentioned is excellent with cases like this. Once you file, his income won't even cover the attorney fees. You'll walk away clean. We can start building everything we talked about. The paper didn't shake in his grip. His breathing remained even. The carefully cultivated control that had built his business, that had protected his privacy all these years, held firm even as his world shifted on its axis. With deliberate precision, Jerome returned the email to its exact position beneath the statements. He aligned the edges of the papers perfectly, maintaining the exact order he'd found them in. The folder went back into the cabinet at precisely the same angle it had been filed. He turned off the light in Trish's office, closing the door with the same quiet care he'd always shown. His footsteps made no sound on the hardwood as he walked to the living room. The floors he'd refinished himself, proud to make their home better, never questioning why she'd grown so distant as he worked. The darkness of the room enveloped him as he sat in his chair. He didn't reach for the television remote, didn't call anyone, didn't pour a drink. He simply sat, letting the full weight of discovery settle into his bones. In that darkness, Jerome made one clear decision. This would not be a moment of reaction. Hot anger, wild accusations, impulsive confrontation. Those were reactions, and reactions gave away power. What was needed, what he would do, was respond. The distinction crystallized in his mind with the same clarity he brought to business decisions. A reaction was emotional, immediate, uncontrolled. A response was strategic, measured, complete. A reaction would give Trish exactly what she expected from the simple man she thought she'd married. But a response would show her exactly who she had betrayed. The morning sun hadn't yet broken when Jerome made the first call. His attorney's voice was sharp, despite the early hour. Nathaniel Cross never seemed to truly sleep. Jerome, this is unexpected. The concern in Nathaniel's tone was subtle but present. I need you to clear your schedule this morning, Jerome said quietly, standing in his kitchen with his coffee untouched. What I'm about to tell you requires immediate attention. He laid out everything: the hidden account, the structured transfers, the email, David Ossie, in the same measured tone he used for business decisions. When he finished, Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. Tell me what you want, his attorney said finally. I want everything moved into proper corporate structure. Every asset, every account, everything that belongs to Carter Consolidated needs to be legally distinct and protected. I want it done quickly, but I want it done right. It'll be ready by noon. And Jerome? Nathaniel's voice softened slightly. I'm sorry. The second call went to Beverly, Washington. His operations manager answered on the first ring, already at her desk despite the early hour. Beverly, I need two things immediately. First, prepare a complete asset summary. Every subsidiary, every account, every vehicle in the fleet. Second, I need a recommendation for a licensed private investigator. Someone discreet, thorough, and available today. Beverly, ever efficient, didn't ask for explanations she knew would come. The summary will be on your desk in an hour. For the investigator, I know someone. Former federal. Does clean work. Over the next several days, Jerome maintained perfect normalcy at home. He cooked dinner twice, asking about Trish's day while she picked at her food. He kept his voice warm, his manner open. Every movement was carefully calculated to give her no ammunition, no hint that he had seen behind the curtain she thought was still in place. The investigator's first report arrived via encrypted email on Wednesday. The affair with David Ossie was confirmed. 14 months of hotel receipts, restaurant charges, carefully documented meetings disguised as work functions. But it was the second report that landed like a hammer blow. Subject recruited target into her workplace approximately 18 months ago, the report read. Multiple witnesses confirm she personally recommended him for the position, advocated for his hiring, and facilitated his integration into the office environment. This appears to have been a deliberate strategy to create daily proximity and plausible cover for ongoing contact. Jerome read the words 3 times, letting each implication settle. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't even simple betrayal. This was architectural. She had built the infrastructure of his replacement while sleeping beside him, while accepting his care, while watching him renovate their home. Friday evening arrived clear and cool. Jerome sat at the kitchen table, hands folded calmly, waiting. When Trish's key turned in the lock, he remained still. She paused in the doorway, registering his presence. "You're home early. We need to talk," Jerome said quietly. "I know about the account. I know about David. I know about the timeline you've been planning." Trish's face shifted, not to guilt or shame, but to something harder. Her voice took on an edge he recognized from the email's tone. "Well, I suppose that makes this simpler. The marriage is over, Jerome. It has been for a long time." "How long? 14 months? Or 18? He kept his voice level. She lifted her chin. "I've been unhappy for years. I've been patient. I've been supportive. But Jerome, look at you. You're a maintenance man. I can't build a future with a maintenance man. I deserve more than what you can give me." "I see." He nodded slowly. "This is my house," she continued, gaining momentum. "My name is on the mortgage. I need you to pack your things and leave. Tonight." Jerome stood, his movements deliberate and calm. "All right." He climbed the stairs to their bedroom, her bedroom now, and packed a single bag. Not because he had to, but because he chose to be done cleanly. Every movement was measured, precise. Walking down the front path, he could feel her watching from the doorway. He pulled out his phone and made one call. Bring them around now. The street had been quiet, residential, normal. Then they came. 15 black suburban LTs appeared, moving in perfect formation. Each vehicle gleamed under the streetlights, the Carter Consolidated Holdings logo distinct on their rear windows. They rolled to a synchronized stop along the curb, a display of power in automotive form. Drivers emerged in crisp suits, taking position. From the lead vehicle, Troy Banks unfolded his impressive frame. The head of security's voice carried clearly in the evening air. "Ready when you are, Mr. Carter." Jerome walked to the open door without looking back. He could feel Trish's presence on the porch, could imagine her face as her narrative collapsed around her. But he didn't turn. He simply got in, accepted the bottle of water his assistant offered, and let the procession carry him away from the life she had decided he deserved. Jerome stood at the window of the executive suite, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled. The space was immaculate, designed for visiting clients with its modern furnishings and subtle luxury. Now, it would be his home, at least temporarily. He lowered himself into one of the leather chairs and, for the first time since finding that manila folder, allowed himself to feel everything. The grief came in waves, not just for the marriage, but for the weight of 8 years spent protecting someone who had been planning her escape. He thought about the morning coffees, the renovations done with his own hands, the quiet moments when he'd convinced himself that waiting to reveal his success was the right choice. The pain was physical, settling in his chest like a stone. But Jerome Carter hadn't built an empire by dwelling in emotion. After 30 minutes, he straightened in the chair and picked up his phone. There was a business to run. The next morning, Beverly arrived with a stack of documents requiring his attention. A major logistics contract was up for bid, specialized secure transport for medical supplies across 3 states. The numbers needed his review. "The projections look solid," he said, scanning the figures. "Have Troy assess the route security requirements and factor in any additional personnel costs. I want this bid to be competitive, but realistic." Beverly nodded, making notes. The maintenance division needs sign-off on the new equipment lease, and the real estate subsidiary has 2 properties closing next week. This was his world, the one Trish had never bothered to ask about. Carter Consolidated Holdings encompassed four carefully structured subsidiaries: Armored Logistics and Transport, Private Executive Protection, Commercial Facility Maintenance, and a real estate holding company that managed their properties and select investment ventures. 13 years, Jerome said quietly, more to himself than Beverly. Started with one used truck, hauling sensitive documents for Harrison and Myers Law. Now we're running 15 custom Suburbans and a fleet of armored transports. The numbers were clear: $4.2 million in total assets, generating over $800,000 annually. Built methodically, legally, with reinvested profits and careful growth. No shortcuts, no compromises. After Beverly left, Jerome made the hardest call, to his mother. Gloria Carter answered on the second ring. "Jerome? You're calling early." He told her everything, his voice steady but tired. When he finished, the silence stretched for a moment. "What do you need?" Gloria asked simply. "Just pray, Mama." "Already am." There was steel in her tone. "And I'm calling Nathaniel right after this. I want to understand every piece of paperwork in this situation." That was his mother. Practical love in action. She didn't waste time with, "I told you so," though she'd had reservations about Trish from the beginning. She moved straight to support and strategy. 3 days later, Nathaniel called, requesting an immediate meeting. Jerome found his attorney in his office, 2 sets of documents laid out on the desk. The discovery process surfaced some interesting patterns, Nathaniel began, sliding the first set forward. "Your wife and Mr. O.C. have been meeting with real estate agents for 4 months. Multiple properties, all in the $600,000 to $800,000 range. They've been actively planning a post-divorce life while you were still contributing to the household." Jerome absorbed this without visible reaction. "And the second set?" "Mr. Osei's financial profile." Nathaniel's tone was dry. "He's carrying $90,000 in personal debt across multiple accounts. There's also a judgment lion from a landlord dispute in 2021. He lost in court and hasn't satisfied the judgment. His credit score is in the low 500s. The irony settled over Jerome like a heavy blanket. Trish had orchestrated an elaborate exit strategy, recruited her chosen replacement, and planned their future life together. All while that chosen replacement was drowning in debt and dodging creditors. She had traded a self-made millionaire for a man who couldn't qualify for a standard mortgage. "Keep building the case," Jerome said quietly, standing. "I want everything documented, everything clean." "You're taking this very calmly," Nathaniel observed. "I'm taking this exactly as I should." Jerome's voice was steady. She made her choice based on what she thought she knew. "Now, we'll all live with what's actually true." He thanked Nathaniel and walked out, his steps measured and purposeful. The grief was still there, but something else had crystallized alongside it, a clear-eyed certainty about what came next. He wasn't shaken. He was focused. Trish sat in her favorite salon chair, getting her weekly blowout while carefully crafting her narrative to Maria, her longtime stylist. It had been over for years, really. We were just going through the motions. She examined her reflection, adjusting her posture. Jerome just left. But honestly, it's for the best. I'm moving forward. She had rehearsed these lines until they felt natural, delivering them with just the right mix of resigned wisdom and quiet strength. The story was spreading through her social circle exactly as she'd planned. She was the woman who'd finally chosen herself, who'd decided to stop settling. "Sometimes you just know when it's time for a change," she continued, watching Maria nod sympathetically in the mirror. "I mean, there's only so long you can wait for someone to grow." Later that afternoon, over lunch with her closest friend Keisha, Trish felt her carefully constructed narrative wobble for the first time. She'd mentioned the SUVs, trying to cast Jerome's departure as some kind of theatrical tantrum. Keisha's fork had stopped halfway to her mouth. After a long silence, she asked, "Trish, what did those SUVs say on them?" The question hung there, heavy and uncomfortable. Trish stirred her salad, avoiding Keisha's eyes. "It doesn't matter. He was just trying to make some kind of statement." "But what did they say?" Keisha pressed. "Can you believe David's firm is up for that new downtown contract?" Trish deflected, forcing brightness into her voice. Keisha let it drop, but her expression remained thoughtful. That evening, Trish's attorney called. The conversation stripped away another layer of her confidence. "Mrs. Carter, I need to manage your expectations regarding the marital estate," her attorney began. "The joint accounts show significantly less activity than anticipated. Mr. A. Carter's primary income appears to have been properly segregated through corporate structures we're only now uncovering." Trish sat down hard on her living room couch. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means the joint marital assets are far more limited than we projected. Also," her attorney paused, "your personal account containing the $47,000 has been documented in discovery. Those funds will need to be accounted for in the settlement." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Trish ended the call and sat in silence, her mind racing. The careful exit strategy she'd built over 14 months was unraveling. She needed to regain control of the situation. Without fully thinking it through, she called Jerome. Her heart pounded as the phone rang. "Hello, Trish." His voice was neutral, professional. She adopted the warm, intimate tone she'd once used when she needed him to fix something around the house. "Jerome, I've been thinking. Maybe we're making this more complicated than it needs to be. We could settle this quietly, just between us. No need for attorneys to drag things out. Let the lawyers handle it." His response was polite, but immediate. "But surely we can—" "The lawyers will handle it," he repeated, still perfectly civil. Then something in his tone shifted as he added, "Have a good evening, Trish." That was what unsettled her most. Not anger or hurt or desperation, but a quiet contentment she'd never heard from him before. He sounded at peace. She hung up, her hands slightly shaking. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Found another house to look at. Time to make some decisions. We can't keep putting this off." She didn't respond. David had been pushing harder lately, wanting commitments, talking about their future. His eagerness, once flattering, now felt suffocating. Trish walked through the quiet house, the house she'd owned before the marriage, the house Jerome had steadily improved with his own hands. She ran her fingers along the kitchen counter he'd installed, looked at the hardwood floors he'd refinished. For the first time since filing the divorce papers, a formless dread began to settle over her. She thought about those SUVs again, the way they had appeared like black ghosts, silent and coordinated. The logo she hadn't quite been able to read in the fading light. The way the drivers had stood at attention. The suited man who had called Jerome Mr. Carter with such deference. Sitting alone in her carefully decorated living room, Trish felt the first real tremor of doubt. Not about leaving. She had committed too fully to that path for doubt. No, this was something deeper and more unsettling. The slow, creeping recognition that she may have fundamentally misread the man she had so confidently dismissed. That perhaps, in all her certainty about who Jerome was, she had never really known him at all. Jerome arrived at Carter Consolidated's main office early, the morning sun barely cresting the horizon. The familiar weight of his security badge settled against his chest as he nodded to the overnight team finishing their shift. Inside his office, he set aside thoughts of Trish's phone call from the previous evening and focused on the documentation spread across his desk. Beverly knocked once before entering, tablet in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. I've got the final proposal draft for the government contract." He smiled, genuinely glad to see her. Beverly's efficiency had been a cornerstone of the company's growth for 6 years. "Walk me through the changes." For the next hour, They reviewed the logistics and secured transport proposal worth $1.1 million over 2 years. Beverly had structured it meticulously: personnel allocations, equipment commitments, security protocols, and implementation timelines. Jerome made 2 strategic adjustments: increasing the dedicated fleet allocation and adding a contingency response protocol that exceeded the basic requirements. These additions will cut into the profit margin, Beverly noted, though her tone suggested approval. But they show we're thinking beyond the baseline, Jerome replied. We're not just meeting specifications, we're anticipating needs they haven't considered yet. He signed the final submission with the same pen he'd used to sign his first document transport contract 13 years ago. A small tradition, but traditions mattered. They were the quiet architecture of something lasting. Beverly remained standing, another tablet document queued. There's one other matter requiring your attention. The facility maintenance contract with Pearson and Associates is up for renewal next month. Trish's firm, David Osie's workplace. What's the annual value? Jerome asked, his voice neutral. $68,000, below our current minimum for maintenance contracts. We've had to adjust pricing structures across the board due to increased labor and material costs. Jerome nodded slowly. It was a legitimate business consideration. Their facility maintenance subsidiary had grown, establishing larger contracts that made smaller ones less cost-effective. Standard non-renewal notification? Already drafted. Professional, courteous, citing market conditions and operational restructuring. No bridges burned. This was why Beverly was invaluable. She understood both strategy and optics. Send it. And Beverly? Thank you for everything these past weeks. She gave him a small, knowing smile. The proposal team would like to celebrate when we win this contract. They're thinking catered lunch in the break room. When we win it, they can have whatever they want. He meant it. His team had earned more than their salaries. They'd earned his loyalty. Throughout the day, Jerome moved through his professional world with focused precision. He reviewed security protocols with Troy, approved 3 new vehicle acquisitions, and met with his fleet maintenance supervisor about implementing predictive diagnostics across the transport division. This was the company he'd built, not with flash or self-promotion, but with steady competence and reinvestment. Every truck in the fleet, every security officer in the field, every maintenance contract properly fulfilled, these were the building blocks of something real. That evening, Jerome drove to his mother's house for their standing Sunday dinner. Gloria Carter's home smelled of roasted chicken and decades of family memories. She hugged him tight, then served him a plate that could have fed 3 people. They talked about normal things first: the church renovation project she was organizing, his sister's new baby, the garden she was planning for spring. But Gloria Carter had never been one to avoid difficult truths. "I heard something at church today," she said carefully, setting down her fork. "Sister Matthews, you remember her? Her niece is married to Trish's cousin Marcus." Jerome waited. His mother wouldn't have brought it up without reason. 2 years ago, at a family gathering, Trish had a conversation with her people. Told them you'd never amount to anything. Said she was already planning her next chapter. Gloria's eyes held a mother's fierce protection. Her own mama told her to be patient, give it time. But she went ahead with her plans anyway. Jerome sat very still, absorbing this final piece of the puzzle. Not a wife who had fallen out of love or made a mistake in a moment of weakness. A woman who had looked at everything he was and decided it wasn't enough. Who had spent 2 years arranging her exit while accepting his care, his work, his presence in her life. The chicken sat untouched on his plate. His mother reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Okay, Mama," he said quietly. "Now I know everything I need to know." The morning light filtered through the windows of Jerome's corporate suite as he dialed Nathaniel's number. His mother's revelation from Sunday dinner had settled into a kind of clarity. the final piece that made the picture complete. "I want one meeting with her," Jerome said when Nathaniel answered, "face to face, before we close the settlement." "To negotiate?" Nathaniel's tone carried professional caution. "To speak." Jerome moved to the window, looking out over the city he'd built his company in. "She needs to hear certain things directly from me. Not through lawyers, not through friends. From me." There was a pause on the line. "All right. But first, let me walk you through where the settlement stands." For the next 40 minutes, Nathaniel detailed the legal landscape with surgical precision. The joint marital estate had been properly segregated from Jerome's corporate holdings. Carter Consolidated's assets, the fleet, the contracts, the real estate, were protected within their legitimate business structures. Everything was documented. Everything was clean. "Her $47,000 fund has been addressed as marital assets," Nathaniel continued. "Given her income level and the marriage duration, no alimony is triggered. She'll receive her proportional share of joint property, nothing more. The house she owned before marriage remains hers, as it always was." Jerome nodded, though Nathaniel couldn't see it. "And it's all solid? No vulnerabilities?" "None. Your corporate structure was built right from the beginning. We're just maintaining what was already proper." Nathaniel paused. "When do you want this meeting?" "End of the week. Neutral ground. A restaurant with private rooms. I'll have my office send the request through proper channels." Another pause. "Jerome, be clear about what you want from this conversation." "I am clear," Jerome replied. "Very clear." He had barely ended the call when Beverly knocked, her face bright with news she was trying to contain professionally. "Mr. Carter, the government contract team is on line 3. Jerome picked up the phone. 20 minutes later, he set it down and looked at Beverly, who was still standing in his doorway. "Tell the team to order whatever food they want for the celebration. And Beverly, make sure you include yourself in the profit-sharing adjustments for this quarter. This doesn't happen without you." The office came alive with the news. Jerome watched his people, the dispatch team, the security officers, the maintenance supervisors, sharing handshakes and genuine smiles. They had built this together, brick by brick, contract by contract. Troy appeared in the doorway, massive and formal as ever. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter," he said simply. "To all of us," Jerome replied. "Make sure the fleet detail for the first phase is your best people." That evening, alone in his corporate suite, Jerome sat at his desk with a legal pad. He needed to organize his thoughts for the meeting with Trish, not in anger, not in haste, but with the same precision he applied to everything else. 3 things, he decided. 3 specific things he needed to say, in order, with no room for deflection or distraction. This wasn't going to be an argument. He wasn't interested in hearing explanations or accusations. This was going to be a closing statement, the final word in a story she thought she was writing but had never actually controlled. He wrote late into the night, crossing out words, refining points, until every sentence served its purpose. When he was satisfied, he called the restaurant he had in mind, an upscale place downtown with private dining rooms. The manager knew him. Carter Consolidated had handled their document transport for years. "The Maple Room is available Thursday evening, Mr. Carter," the manager said. "Complete privacy, separate entrance if needed." "Perfect. For 2 people. 7 o'clock. Jerome emailed the details to Nathaniel's office for formal transmission to Trish's attorney. Then he sat back, feeling the weight of the past weeks, the discovery, the revelations, the quiet execution of necessary things, settle into its final form. His phone buzzed within the hour. "Nathaniel." She accepted. Thursday at 7. Jerome got ready for bed with his usual efficiency. He hung his suit for tomorrow, set his 3 phones to charge, and turned out the lights. For the first time since finding that folder in Trish's office, sleep came easily, without the circular thoughts that had plagued him. He had built something true. He had protected it properly. And now he would speak his truth, once, completely, and move forward. The city lights cast soft patterns on his ceiling as he drifted off, his mind already organizing tomorrow's tasks: the government contract implementation, the fleet assignments, the ordinary work of building something that would last. The maple room at Vincenzo's cast warm light across polished wood panels. Jerome arrived 20 minutes early, selecting a seat that faced the door. He had chosen this restaurant carefully, upscale enough to maintain decorum, private enough for truth. The maitre d' brought water without being asked and closed the door silently. Jerome checked his phones one last time, then placed them face down on the table. He had worn a charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, his standard business attire, though Trish had never seen him dress this way. He settled into a state of calm focus, the same mindset he brought to major contract negotiations. At exactly 7, the door opened. Trish entered wearing a navy dress he'd never seen. Her makeup perfect, hair freshly styled. She had dressed for impact, for control. Jerome recognized the careful calculation in her appearance. She was still trying to read the situation, to position herself advantageously. "Thank you for coming," Jerome said, his voice steady. He gestured to the chair across from him. Trish sat, smoothing her dress with practiced grace. "I wasn't sure what to expect. I asked for this meeting because I have 3 things to say. After that, the lawyers will handle everything else." Jerome maintained eye contact, his tone neither warm nor cold. "Would you like to order something first?" "No." Trish's fingers tensed slightly on her water glass. "Say what you need to say." Jerome reached into his briefcase and removed a bound document. "First, I want you to understand exactly what you were married to." He slid the company summary across the table. Carter Consolidated Holdings, 4 operating subsidiaries, Armored Logistics and Transport, Executive Protection, Commercial Facility Maintenance, and Real Estate Holdings, 15 vehicles in the primary fleet. Annual revenue over $800,000. Total asset value $4.2 million. He watched the emotions cross her face like weather. Disbelief first, then rapid calculation. Finally, a dawning recognition that twisted into something between rage and horror. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned pages. "I started it at 29 with a used truck and 1 contract. Built it over 13 years, clean and legal. Every vehicle you saw that night, owned outright. Every contract properly structured. Every subsidiary properly managed." Jerome's voice remained measured. "You're wondering why I never told you? That's the second part of this first point." Trish looked up, her composure cracking. Jerome continued, "When I was 19, I watched my father lose half of everything to his second wife. She stayed until the money was secured, then left. He never recovered. So I made a decision. I would be chosen for who I was, not what I had. I waited to tell you because I wanted to be certain." "You lied to me," Trish whispered. "No, I worked maintenance contracts because one of my companies handles facility maintenance. I never lied. I simply waited. And while I waited, you made your own decisions." Jerome took a slow breath. "Which brings me to the second thing I need to say. I know everything, Trish. The account you built over 14 months. The email from David that you printed and kept like a blueprint. The real estate listings you've been reviewing together. The conversation with your family 2 years ago where you said, 'I would never amount to anything.'" Trish's face flushed. "I was unhappy. You were distant. I never felt like I truly knew you." "You didn't try to know me," Jerome cut in, voice still calm. "You tried to leave me. Those are different things. You recruited David into your workplace 18 months ago. You planned this methodically while accepting everything I provided. That's not unhappiness. That's calculation." He watched her absorb this, watched her searching for solid ground and finding none. "The third and final thing," he continued, "is what happens now. The settlement is what it is. Your attorney has the details. Your secret account has been documented as marital funds. There will be no alimony because your income exceeds the threshold. The house you owned before marriage remains yours. But everything else, everything you thought you would extract, is properly protected within corporate structures that were built long before we met. Jerome stood, adjusting his suit jacket. I want you to know I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm doing it because I'm worth more than what you decided I was. He reached for his coat. David Ossie has a $90,000 debt profile and a judgment lien on his record. You had a man who was building an empire. I hope the trade was worth it. He slipped his coat on with fluid precision, collected his phones from the table and walked to the door. Behind him, Trish sat motionless, the company summary still open before her, its pages bright under the warm restaurant lights. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to Jerome's temporary office by Nathaniel's assistant. The settlement was exactly as structured: clean, proportional, confined to documented marital assets. Jerome signed without hesitation. Beverly, passing his door, noted the moment with a small nod of acknowledgement. Later that day, Jerome received a call from Nathaniel. Just got off the phone with opposing counsel, his attorney said. She told me she's never seen a marital estate this thoroughly organized and protected. Said whoever did your corporate structuring deserves significant credit. That would be you, Jerome replied. True. Nathaniel's dry humor surfaced briefly. Everything's filed. You're officially done. Jerome thanked him and ended the call. Through his office window, he watched 3 of his vehicles pull out for afternoon routes, gleaming black against the autumn sun. Across town, Trish sat in her attorney's office receiving the final review. The numbers were stark. No alimony due to income thresholds, joint assets limited to documented accounts, corporate holdings completely separate and protected. Her carefully accumulated $47,000 was properly categorized as marital funds. She had traded an empire for a promise that was already crumbling. David's financial reality emerged in layers. The $90,000 debt wasn't just numbers on paper. It was credit card payments, personal loans, and the lingering judgment lien that made renting quality properties nearly impossible. His salary, respectable on the surface, barely covered his obligations. Trish found herself covering dinner more often, then utilities, then portions of his car payment. The glamour of their imagined future dissolved into spreadsheet anxiety. Their relationship, freed from the electricity of secrecy, revealed its structural weakness. Without the charge of forbidden meetings and careful planning, without the shared fantasy of escape, they were left with ordinary conversations that felt increasingly strained. David's push for commitment had transformed into a subtle neediness that Trish found herself resenting. At David's firm, the loss of Carter Consolidated's facility maintenance contract created ripples. The quarterly numbers dipped enough to trigger review. David's division head began excluding him from certain meetings. He wasn't fired. That would have been cleaner. Instead, his relevance slowly eroded. Younger colleagues were assigned the projects he once led. His suggestions in meetings received polite nods and no follow-up. Meanwhile, Carter Consolidated's offices hummed with forward momentum. The government logistics contract launched formally, bringing with it a wave of operational expansion. Jerome approved 3 new hires, 2 drivers, and an operations coordinator. Beverly's promotion to chief operating officer came with a profit-sharing arrangement that made her quiet smile a fixture in the hallways. The company celebration filled the main conference room with catered food and genuine warmth. Gloria Carter arrived carrying a chocolate cake decorated with the company logo in perfect fondant detail. Had it done special, she told Beverly with a wink. Some occasions matter more than others. Jerome stood before his assembled staff, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, the way they knew him best. 8 years ago, he began, this company ran 1 truck on 1 route. Today we're launching our largest contract to date. That's not because of me. It's because every person in this room shows up with excellence, every day, without fanfare. You don't just work here, you build here, and I want you to know I see it. The applause that followed was real. Troy, massive in his usual dark suit, actually smiled. Beverly's eyes glistened slightly. Gloria watched her son with quiet pride. That evening, after the office cleared out, Jerome took a different route home. He drove past the house. Not slowly, not stopping, just passing. The porch light was on. A single car in the driveway. He felt no pull, no grief, just the clean recognition that this was something he had walked away from by choice, not something taken from him. In his corporate suite, 20 minutes later, Jerome poured a glass of water and stood at the window. The city spread out below, lights coming on as dusk settled. He thought about that night in Trish's office, finding the folder, making the decision to respond rather than react. Every consequence now unfolding, the settlement, David's slow professional decline, Trish's confrontation with reality, his company's expansion, had been set in motion by that single choice. Response over reaction, strategy over impulse, building over breaking. Morning light crept through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting clean lines across Jerome's modern kitchen. At 5 a.m., exactly 14 months since the divorce papers were signed, he moved through his morning ritual with practiced ease. The coffee maker hummed quietly, its aroma filling the space he had chosen entirely for himself. The house was everything the old one wasn't. Open concept, minimalist design, situated in a neighborhood where success didn't need to announce itself. He had paid cash, signed the papers without ceremony, and moved in with furniture chosen for function and comfort rather than show. The kitchen featured dark granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that gleamed in the dawn light. It was his in every sense. Jerome settled at the breakfast bar with his first coffee, 3 phones lined up beside him. The personal one rarely buzzed this early. The 2 business lines already showed messages. Carter Consolidated never truly slept. The government contract had exceeded projections, opening doors Jerome had seen coming but hadn't rushed toward. 2 new client relationships emerged organically. A regional bank's secure document transport division and a tech company's executive protection needs. The fleet now numbered 20 vehicles. 3 new staff members had joined in the past quarter alone. Beverly's leadership as COO had transformed the company's operational rhythm. She approached each day with the same quiet competence that had first earned Jerome's trust, but now her influence touched every aspect of the business. The profit-sharing arrangement had been more than earned. It was an investment in the company's future that paid dividends daily. Jerome checked a message from Troy about the executive protection rotation schedule, then scrolled to a text from Audra Price. They had shared dinner twice in the past month. First, at a client appreciation event, where her direct questions and unaffected manner caught his attention, then at a small Italian place where conversation flowed easily for 3 hours. Audra approached life with the same precision she brought to her civil engineering projects. She asked good questions, listened to the answers, and wasn't impressed by surface presentations. Last night, over pasta, she had asked about his divorce without awkwardness or agenda. He told her the simple version. She nodded and said, "That must have been quite a moment with the SUVs." Then she smiled and asked about the government contract's logistics challenges. Jerome found himself smiling at the memory as he replied to her message about meeting again next week. No rush, no pressure, just the careful architecture of something that could become significant if given space to grow naturally. His mother's voice echoed in his mind from their last Sunday dinner. Gloria had watched him describe the new bank contract, then said simply, "You're sleeping better these days." She didn't ask about Trish anymore. She asked about the business, about Audra, about whether he was eating proper meals. She brought dessert every week, and left containers of food that somehow lasted exactly until the next Sunday. The second cup of coffee was halfway done when his phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, a mutual friend from his college days. Jerome opened it, expecting the usual check-in about getting together for lunch. Instead, he read, "Thought you should know. Ran into Keisha at the grocery store. Trish and David split up about 3 months after everything was final. Money issue. She's still in the house, living alone. Figured you'd want to hear it from a friend." Jerome set the phone down and looked out at the sunrise painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The news settled over him without weight. There was no triumph in it, no vindication needed. He felt something quieter, cleaner, confirmation. He had built something true, brick by brick, year by year. She had gambled everything on something hollow. The math always resolved itself in the end. Beverly's message came through on the business line. Potential opportunity in secure data transport. Tech startup looking to move sensitive hardware between research facilities. Could be our entry into a new market. Available to discuss this morning? Jerome picked up his coffee, the warmth of it matching the contentment in his chest. He began typing a response, mind already moving through the operational requirements, the fleet implications, the staffing needs. He was building again. In truth, he had never stopped. The morning light grew stronger, filling his kitchen with clarity. His phones buzzed with purpose. Somewhere across town, a woman sat alone in a house full of assumption. Here, in this space he had chosen, Jerome Carter was exactly who he had always been. A builder, a planner, a man who understood that real wealth wasn't in what you claimed, but in what you created. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.